Thank you so much, Renee. And hi, everybody. I'm really grateful to be here this morning. This is actually my first 40-minute share. So to give me just a little bit of peace and grounding, I wanted to start with a prayer that's one of my favorites. God, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Thank you. If I had to give a title to my story, I've always thought this for some reason, it would be like A Tale of Two Mothers. Because my dad did play a big part in my dysfunction, but my birth mom and my adopted mom really, I think, carried a lot of the weight of the dysfunction that I felt. Um, my birth mom died when I was 2 years old, and I don't have any conscious memories of her. And my adopted mom, those are the terms that I've always used that were used like with me. So hopefully I'll be able to keep them straight and not just say mom to confuse anybody. But um, my dad remarried about a year and a half, a little less than a year and a half later after my birth mom passed away. Um, and my dad, he's never really shared a lot of dysfunction in his family that I know of, but he has some kind of cognitive impairment that he's never been diagnosed with. Um, I mean, he's been able to sustain a job and two marriages, so it's minor, but it affects a lot more of his like social emotional skills and communication skills. Um, so it's even though he hasn't necessarily that I know of experienced a lot of like trauma or abuse or anything like that, he really modeled for me that like don't talk and don't feel kind of messages just out of his own like lack of cognitive ability. Um, and by both of my moms, my birth mom and my adopted mom, came from very dysfunctional families. And I've always wondered, like, with my dad's neurodivergence, like, how is he able to attract and sustain two relationships? But both of these women, I think they were just really looking for a stable, sturdy man that was just going to do, like, have no surprises. And even if he was a little bit on the not so exciting side, like, he was just going to show up every day. Um, my birth mom actually came from an Irish immigrant mother, and my uncle has described my grandparents as kind of functional alcoholics. I don't know if they were or not. They died when I was young, so I don't have a lot of memories of them, but they um, had an evening happy hour every day. And I'm not super familiar with Irish culture, so I don't know if that's like a normal part of just Irish culture and drinking, or if that is alcoholism. They were never really drunk, but my uncle did have, I'm not my uncle, my grandfather, he was a very sweet man, but he just had a really hard time controlling his emotions. So he had a lot of anger. There was not so much with my birth mom, but with her two siblings. They were a little bit more rebellious and had some more contention. So there was a lot of, he had a lot of anger and some violence with them that was going on in their house. My adopted mom also came from a really dysfunctional family, but in kind of a similar way, kind of different. The parents were kind of neglectful. She was the third child, and she felt like she kind of fell by the wayside with them. Um, Her dad was also had a lot of anger and egotism and um, a lot of verbal abuse. There's a little bit of physical abuse, and she's hinted at some incest, but I'm not really sure how deep it goes. So she's hid some of her wounds from me that she's not willing to talk about. Um, her parents also did have a divorce, and they had a lot of fighting and anger. She gets really, really triggered by any kind of conflict, any kind of arguing, even with my brother and me, like sibling bickering, just like that's harmless. She could not handle listening to that. And it's made my parents' marriage one that they don't resolve conflict at all. They just don't talk to each other for 3 days and then act like it's never happened. Um, I was born in the Philippines. My parents were missionaries, and the first 2.5 years of my life, as far as I know, were just wonderful. My mother, my birth mother, was a very devoted, very kind, warm, nurturing mother. Um, and she really loved me and my brother. She was so committed to just being a great mom. And I'm really grateful for those 2 years. She passed away from an ectopic pregnancy, and my dad brought us back here to California. He just, I mean, with his grief, understandably, he really, really struggled as a single parent, but also just with his neurodivergence, he just like was not able to parent us very well at all. But I know that he did the best that he could. Um, this past year has been very interesting for me because I have a daughter who is 3 years old now. And so seeing her turn the age that I was when my birth mom passed away and getting to see kind of her understanding of things this year, it helps to heal that version of me, but to understand that like my daughter has no concept of death right now. Like if her mom is not there, like she doesn't understand that. Um, so I couldn't really understand what was going on. I couldn't understand when my mom wasn't there anymore. It was really hard, and I had never been in daycare before. My mom had always been there. So to be in a different country that I wasn't used to be put in daycare all day when my dad had to work was a huge adjustment. And it led to a lot of attachment, a lot of just unresolved grief that I just wasn't really able to understand what was happening. Um, but I know my dad did his best, even though he wasn't really emotionally equipped. There's this story that he likes to tell. He took us to Disneyland, and I told Minnie Mouse that my mom had died. And I think I was just trying to like look for somebody to process my grief with, because I think my dad just was not equipped to really help me with that. So Minnie Mouse was my hero to look to for that. Um, I understand when my dad got married so soon, even though it really made things a whole lot more confusing for me, like a new mom. And I was taught to call her mom. My brother was super excited about the match. He was like, so when are you gonna ask her to marry you? You know, he was really pushing for that. And I think my dad just needed a partner and needed somebody to help with taking care of us. But it was hard. And my birth mom's parents, would tell me stuff like, oh, she's not your real mom, which is very confusing for a 3 year old to be told mixed messages. And right now, I'm like, the past year, I've been putting together a lot of those pieces of healing myself 30 years later. But after they got married, we went back to the Philippines, which was also very dysfunctional. I'm what's known as a third culture kid, which means that like you grow up in one culture, but your parents are from a different culture, and so you kind of have one foot in either one, and it it kind of makes you have a loss of identity because you don't really identify with one culture or the other. You kind of feel caught in between. And I grew up in a small missionary community, which is kind of like growing up in a small town, where everybody knows everybody and everybody's kind of in each other's business. And with the religious aspect of it, you kind of felt like you had to be a good person all the time, right? Like people were watching you. You were supposed to be there to help other people. You weren't supposed to have problems. Um, So in a lot of ways, there was still that don't talk, don't trust, don't feel kind of thing, like just be a good little missionary kid. And so the third culture kid development is so similar to ACAs. Like I think there's a lot of crossover with that. It's really interesting. Um, and just that similar shame aspect of trying to be a good person all the time. There was also a lot of abandonment, just like with ACAs, because my family followed a system where we would be in the Philippines for about 3 years and then we would come back here for a year. And every other missionary family followed their own routine, or they would move to a different country to do different work there. So we were just like constantly hopscotching in and out of each other's lives as children. I never had a stable place to live for more than a few years. We were always moving houses. We never had consistent friends, never built like long term relationships and things like that. So that made it really hard for me to connect with people and to trust and to work out relationships. It also makes it, I have this like itch every 3 years or so. It's kind of funny because the home that we live in right now, we just passed living here for 3 years, and I feel this like, I gotta move, I gotta leave, I gotta go somewhere else kind of thing. Um, Even though where we live is wonderful and we're so comfortable there, it still just like makes me need to move. Um, and you can imagine with that like constant saying goodbyes and instability, it just like piled on grief over my life. I heard this statistic about third culture kids where in generally we say goodbye to more people by the time we turn 18 than the average person does by the time we turn 80. So that's a lot of loss on top of just not processing my birth mom's loss too. Um, and over the course of my life, we never really hardly talked about my birth mom. For some reason, I felt guilty or like disrespectful to my adopted mom. So I always kind of felt like I was never able to acknowledge her even when I got older. Um, and my parents, there's this author, and I should have looked her up before we started this meeting, but she wrote a book about, she called them emotionally immature parents. And I felt like that was a really good descriptor of my dad and my adopted mom that raised me, because I know that they loved me and I know that they did the best that they could with me, but they were just, because of the abuse or just the cognitive impairment that my dad had, they were just emotionally immature and they were just not equipped to really be parents, especially to somebody like me who had sustained so much psychological issues and really needed that extra support that they weren't able to give. My dad is kind of robotic in the way that he goes about his day. Like he just kind of gets programmed with what he's supposed to do and he does exactly that. And um he doesn't change unless you kind of like reprogram him with something that he should be doing. And that's how he was for most of when I was growing up. But when I was little, I remember him playing with me and like tickling me and stuff like that. He was different with my birth mom. Partly it could have just been age and just decline too, but he my birth mom had such a beautiful way of like, especially with introverted people, she would just like pull them out of their shell. Like she always wanted to be engaged with people and connecting with other people and kind of in the center of things. So I think she really just like pulled him along in a good way, to be more involved. And after she passed away, my adopted mom, just because she's so shut down from her parents' relationship and terrified of like most conflict, I think she just mostly let him be who he was going to be, and he just crawled back into his shell and just was stagnant. And that's led to a lot of resentment for me that I've been having to work with. But she just did the best that she could, and she's just a different wife and a different mother. um but my adopted mom is very dissociated, and I'm really grateful to this program because I never understood that before being in this program and hearing people describe their dissociation. And it just was a light bulb. I was like, oh, that's my mom. Because it was like the lights are on and nobody's home kind of thing. Like she would just kind of go about her day with a lot of toxic positivity. If other people were happy, she would just fake being happy, but it just seemed very like going through the motions, disengaged, fake kind of emotions and detached responses without really feeling it. She's very codependent and is neither one of my parents are alcoholics, but she's definitely addicted to shopping. Um, in Philippine culture, it's really common to have a house helper, like somebody to do the cooking and cleaning. So my mom never really needed to be at home like to do those kinds of things, but I honestly, like, thinking back, I don't remember what she did all day, like, because she wasn't cooking and cleaning, she wasn't really spending time with us. I think she was just out shopping a lot of the time. And she's aware of it, but she thinks that it's fine because she uses coupons and doesn't spend a lot of money. So she yeah, she just was out shopping or she was out volunteering, I think, because she only really ever worked part-time. So I'm like, I honestly don't know what she did with her day. Um, but both of them were just really disengaged, but going through the motions, like even to this day, I think they can't really understand why I'm in this program, and they can't understand all of the anger and resentment that I've had over the years, for the way that they have parented, because I think in their minds, they've done everything they're supposed to do. Like they came home for dinner every night, check. Like they didn't fight in front of us, check. They went to church every week, check. They had a Bible study. They like fed and clothed us and sent us to private school. So it seems like they did all the right things, but there was no emotional engagement, and it was just going through the motions. And that was what I had the biggest issue with, because I like, to their credit, I am kind of like a higher needs, more sensitive kind of person. Like I need a lot of engagement. I need a lot of nurturing, maybe more than other people. My brother never had an issue with the way that my parents raised him because he's a lot like my dad. He just goes through the motions and hides in his room and doesn't need engagement from anybody. So he's perfectly happy with their parenting. But I always needed, like, I wanted to be cuddled. I wanted to be nurtured and engaged. I wanted somebody to read me bedtime stories, to, like, help me when I was scared and things like that. And they were just never really able to do that. I'm grateful I didn't grow up with a lot of like I never heard my parents have a fight ever. But I also never really heard them laugh that much. I never really heard them share a joke. It was just like a void of nothing. It was just silence and no stimulation, just like emptiness in that household. And I just felt like I was starving, even though I was fed and clothed and had everything on paper that I it seemed like I needed. Um, but I I would wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, like I would be scared or I would be sick. And my mom, she has one of the laundry list traits of get that annoyance or anger or dislike for people that are weak or victims. So a lot of my kind of neediness and sensitivity, she was really turned off by. And she seemed, I think because she didn't have us as babies and she never did like waking up 5 o'clock at five, 5 times a night kind of thing. She had me when I was 3, so like I was already potty trained. She never had to deal with any of that stuff. So the occasional times when I would wake her up because I was scared or something, she would act really annoyed and really inconvenienced. And it just sent a message to me that, like, I need to deal with this on my own. I can't bother them in the middle of the night. I can't, go sleep in their bed or tell them I was scared. So that made me feel really alone my whole life. Alone in a quiet house where nobody was talking to each other. Um, they Because my adopted mom was really kind of neglected by her own parents, she got praised a lot for her own like independence and things like that, and she really passed that on to me. I became an overachiever. I did a lot of things because they only really knew how to praise me for my abilities and for the things that I accomplished. They had no idea how to praise me for my character. um, I was kind of expected to just take care of myself a lot of times. The only time they really gave me a lot of attention was when I was really sick or really hurt. And that kind of turned me into a little bit of a hypochondriac because I I just learned that if I was sick or hurt, I needed to be really, really sick or really, really hurt. Otherwise, nobody was going to pay attention to me or give me nurturing. And so they started to recognize that I was faking it, but it kind of backfired. And they started to just think that I was faking it all the time. And there's been times when they almost refused to hospitalize me for broken bones or for like major issues that they just thought that I was still faking it and they thought I was being dramatic. Um, and that turned me into a really angry and resentful teenager for being a really sad and lonely child. I um, I I also I see this in my daughter, and I've kind of gotten my karma a little bit. Like my daughter's very similar to me. She does have that high needs, like needs a lot of nurturing, needs a lot of intellectual stimulation. And as a parent, I understand now, like it's a lot. She does take a lot of effort from me. And most days I'm happy to give it. Some days I'm just not in a position where I can be available to her that way. And I try my best to communicate that with her. But she's also very strong-willed and very stubborn and defiant and determined and wants to do things her own way. And I was exactly the same way. And both of my parents were not as strong-willed as I was, which meant that I was able to kind of get my way a lot. I knew that if I pushed back on my parents, that they would just kind of melt and retreat because my mom was so scared of conflict. Um, which seems like a great thing, but it was really terrifying to be the strongest person in my life, to be the youngest person in my family and feel like I had the power. It made me feel like I had all the responsibility, like I couldn't depend on my parents to take care of me. Um, my brother, I had a lot of resentment with my brother because he got a lot more special attention. He being similar to my dad, he did actually get diagnosed with like ADD and some learning disabilities and stuff like that. And because he had a more noticeable, harder time, I think, he got a lot more special attention. Like my mom helped him with his homework. They like catered to a lot of his pickiness and things like that. And maybe because I was just more higher needs emotionally and that was uncomfortable for them, I was just expected to suck it up. I just had to deal with it because I got the good grades and was just okay, we'll just go over there and cry by yourself because we don't want to deal with you. Um, so that made me feel like it was my inner teenager has a lot of issues with justice and fairness because I feel like they treated him with a lot more grace and understanding than they treated me. Um, and that's something that I've been working on because my brother's a wonderful person and we do have our own relationship, but there's still that resentment from my life. Um, my mom was always really critical of me, and I realize now it's because she's always been really critical of herself, but you can't see me from below the shoulders, but I've never been overweight, but she's criticized my weight multiple times as like a young adult and teenager. And she's, been quick to point out blemishes or things like that I feel like sometimes we would be having a conversation and she wouldn't be listening to me. Her eyes would be jumping around to different parts of my face, just looking at things and not saying anything, but not listening to what I was saying either. So I did not want to be home. I took every opportunity I could to leave the house, to go to sleepovers, to be in sports and activities and things like that. Um, and as soon as I got out of high school, I jumped right into college. It was never like fully communicated to me, but I just had that expectation that I needed to get a job right away. I needed to support myself, even though I've always been an under earner. I have always like felt like I could not go to my parents to ask for money. And the few times that I have needed to, it had a lot of shame and guilt attached to it, like I somehow failed. Um, but I discovered the 12 steps in college, and I took this class that was called Addictions Assessment and Interventions. And it was led by this guy who is a recovering alcoholic, and he led the local Salvation Army. And it was an amazing class. He had the best assignment where he had each of us individually visit two program meetings. One of them had to be AA and the other one we could pick. I didn't know there was so many options, so I just picked NA, but I was so blown away by those meetings. I took like pages of notes, and not on people's stories or anything that was their personal business, but like they just said the most inspirational things and my mind was blown, and I wanted to be like them. Like I wanted what they had. And I started looking at the 12 steps and I just thought like, oh wow, you could really apply this to anything. And I had no idea how many different 12 step groups there were out there, but um, I didn't know that I could have been eligible for probably like 5 different meetings. But um, I decided to apply it to myself just by myself. So I like did the 12 steps by myself in college, to the best of my ability that I knew how. Like my roommate heard my fifth step, and I realize now, like I didn't recognize the power of the group and the power of having a sponsor and doing this work with other people is so necessary. So I really missed out on that just because I wasn't aware. But it was still a good experience. The amends were nice and it gave me a lot of closure. But after that, I kind of forgot about it, the 12 steps for the most part. Um, until like a true ACA, I met my future husband who was a recovering alcoholic. And I thought that was perfectly fine because he'd been sober for 10 years. So I thought, well, he's safe. Like he's probably not going to relapse. And he did it so far, like knock on wood, thankfully, hopefully. He maintains his sobriety, but he was always sober, but he was not active in AA for as long as I knew him. He wasn't engaged with his sponsor. But he was able to maintain his sobriety just because he was such a spiritual person and he was really living the steps, despite not having the meetings. But he did not have emotional sobriety. He did not know about that. And his new addiction when I first knew him was anger. He never hit me or anything, but he came really, really close several times. And I was really concerned for my safety at one point. I didn't know about Al-Anon. I thought Al-Anon was just a support group. I didn't know that it was its own 12-step group, and I didn't know that it was accessible to people even though their alcoholic wasn't drinking. So those were some tough years because I was really not by myself because I had my higher power, of course, but I didn't have meetings to go to. But it did teach me a lot of things, because I never saw my parents fight. I never knew how to resolve a conflict. So it taught me I needed to resolve this conflict. I needed to stand up for myself. I needed to fight back in a good way. I knew that I had to choose. I was either going to be a doormat in that relationship or I was going to learn how to stand up for myself. So it taught me some really good things, and it taught us how to communicate really well, and we got to a good place where we had a good relationship after that. It wasn't until I got pregnant with our second child a couple years ago that my husband, this is his story, so I won't go into the details, but he ended up going back to AA. He made amends to me for all of his like anger and things in the past. He got a sponsor. He started working on emotional sobriety, and he started listening to this guy named Bob D, who is a really well-known AA speaker on like listening to his YouTube videos. And he would tell me all these really interesting things about it. So I started listening too, and it was amazing because I would listen to him talk, and despite all the alcohol, I've never been much of a drinker, even really socially, but I could relate to everything except the alcohol. Like everything that he talked about being an addict, it was like a light bulb moment, and I couldn't understand. I was like, I'm not an alcoholic though. Like what's going on? Like why can I relate so much? And my husband always kind of jokingly would say that I was a control addict. And I was like, okay, well, as far as I know, there's no controllers anonymous. Like I felt like there was no meeting for me. So I felt like maybe I'll just go to Al-Anon or something. I finally learned what Al-Anon was exactly, and I was ready to go there, but with a newborn and a toddler, I wasn't able to make it work. So I was just waiting, and through kind of like a serendipitous kind of thing, somebody found out about this website called Catholic in Recovery, and it's kind of like all the 12 steps, but applied towards like people who share the Catholic faith. And I started going to, they have like this general addiction meeting that I thought, well, maybe I'll just go to that one. And my husband, through just like a random, like it's so silly, but just one day he told me, oh, you should go to the dysfunctional family meeting because it's so much more interesting. Some of the other ones are boring, which is such a funny way to end up in ACA. But I went there one day and it was like I was like, where has this place been my whole life? Like, this is exactly for me. And I had no idea. So that was 13 months ago, and I've been here ever since. I ended up going to kind of the standard ACA meetings after a while, and I did a 90 and 90, and it's been like so incredible, this transformation of the past year and a month. The greatest lessons that I've really learned were how to talk and trust and feel. Because my family didn't talk, um, these meetings with the structure of no crosstalk was exactly what I needed because I was always so insecure and defensive of any kind of criticism or feedback from other people that I really needed to have these meetings, to learn how to share. It's kind of like sharing with training wheels on, like just to learn how to talk. In my 90 and 90, I shared in almost every single meeting that I went to, which I know is not for everybody, but I knew that I needed that because I needed to practice like a little kid, like a little kid learning how to walk for the first time, like they constantly want to practice because they're so excited about this new skill. And I was that way. I was like, I need to learn this. I need to rewire my brain. I need to practice. And in the beginning, I could only share for like 30 or 60 seconds at a time. Like that was all I was I knew how to talk for. But it was like building up this muscle and learning this new skill. And I learned how to develop this wonderful community of people that I could learn how to trust, where I learned that it's okay to have big feelings and my big feelings are safe here and I can trust other people. And the biggest part is I can trust people when they let me down. Like every single person in my life has disappointed me in some way, and it's okay. And I can still trust that we have a relationship afterwards and we can still work on things. I can trust that people are going to have grace for my mistakes and know that I'm not perfect and it's okay. Um, and learning how to identify and feel my emotions because my parents didn't know how to talk about their feelings, and so I never learned how to talk about my feelings. And so learning how to actually listen without just skipping to the end and trying to fix everything, learning how to listen to my inner child, actually meet my inner children and inner teenager and hear what they were feeling and identify that true self. I know I don't act in my true self all the time, but I've learned that there is that voice in me, that true self that gives me that gut intuition that I can listen to and ask for direction when I need it. I've learned that some emotions don't need to be fixed, like grief. It's okay to sit in grief for a little bit, and it's not something that you blow right past. You really need to feel it in order to heal it. And it's not something to be numbed. But that doesn't mean that I can't take gentleness breaks because sometimes grief does get overwhelming and I need to go distract myself for a couple hours and come back to the grief later. And it's okay. Um, and learning also that feelings don't need to be marinated in either. Just because we feel them doesn't mean that I need to sit in them all day and be a victim to them and allow them to control me. Even though feelings are important, they are not the end of the road. To me, they're the beginning of the road. Identifying my feelings and learning how to self soothe myself as my loving parent. But then taking it further, identifying what are my needs because of those feelings. And if it's something that I'm able to provide for myself, then great. But if it's not, I have my higher power to provide those needs for me and to just keep showing up and doing the work and being present until those needs get met and know that it's going to be okay until those needs get met. I wish I could say that I do this well every day and I don't. But that's something else that I'm learning, to not be a perfectionist all the time, that I don't have to get criticized when I make mistakes, that mistakes are just part of the learning process. And having grace and love for myself is another thing, just learning how to really love myself and value myself and see myself and be okay with that. And thinking back to that first addictions class and that first AA and NA meeting. That's what I wanted. I really just truly wanted to be okay with myself and to be at peace and to hear the peace that other people spoke with about themselves. So thank you very much for letting me share. I wasn't planning on getting so emotional with all this stuff, but I guess it was necessary. So thank you for letting me share, and I will pass. I'm gonna have to turn my camera off, but just know that I am listening to everybody. So thank you.